Welcome back to the Alts Podcast. I'm your host, Horacio Ruiz. We bring you industry leaders and creators to give their insights on the rapidly changing and exciting world of alternative assets. Opinions expressed on this podcast by the host and podcast guests are for informational purposes only and should not be considered investment advice. Podcast hosts and guests may maintain positions in the offerings discussed in this podcast. The intro song, Fishing for Pets, is written and composed by Alan Goldshire from his latest release, Live at the Lakeview Lounge. Thanks for joining me on the podcast. On today's episode, we're talking Pokemon with Jesus Garcia, the Consignment Director for trading card games at Heritage Auctions. Jesus is a lifelong Pokemon fan, going back to the franchise's motion picture release in 1999. Today, we're going to talk about what makes Pokemon so special, some of the holy grails that the brand has to offer, and we'll also get into the emergence of Magic the Gathering. This episode is a great way to learn more about Pokemon and get inside an expert's viewpoint on the importance and increasing popularity of the brand. I hope you enjoy my conversation with Jesus. All right, guys, so today we are talking about Pokemon. Pokemon is probably the largest, franchise out there, as big as it gets. And so we're really happy today to have Jesus Garcia. He's the Consignment Director of trading card games at Heritage Auctions. Jesus, welcome on the podcast.
Thank you. Pleasure to be here.
Yeah. I've the opportunity to talk to you is great. Pokemon's like this thing where me as a sports card collector, I don't know too much about. But, I think that a lot of collectors in that position were like, we want to know more because it's so big. And I kind of just wanted to start with you and kind of how you kind of became sort of like this Pokemon expert.
Right. Yeah, no. So, I was kind of, like every other kid in the late 90s, I would get home from school and I would watch, the cartoons and Pokemon was always on. I would wake up in the mornings on Saturday, Pokemon was on, and I kind of just fell in love with with the story. And then I got introduced, to Pokemon Red and Pokemon Blue, and it just kind of grew from there. And then, I'm like, oh, great. So I got the cartoons, I got video games, and now there's cards that I can collect. And just kind of, all came together over time.
When you talk about the Pokemon Red and the Pokemon Blue, those were the video games, right, that came out? Correct,
yes. Mm-hmm.
And what was the difference between those two?
Nothing really, just the actual cover. I was a fan of Pokemon Red because of Charizard, of course. But it's funny, a lot of people don't know that Pokemon actually started, as a video game first, and then the card game got introduced, and then the anime afterwards.
So so that's me. I didn't know. I thought that the anime got created first, and that then from there, that's where kind of the video game and the card game got introduced from there. Okay.
Yeah, no. In 1996, Pocket Monsters Red and Green were introduced in Japan as the first two Pokemon video games, and they were a massive hit. And then after that, Pokemon started creating what are known as Top Sun cards, little bubblegum packs. They had 2 cards each, and that was just kind of like a trial base. Whether they were trying to figure out if kids would be interested in collecting cards with their characters on there. And, It worked out, and, the rest is pretty much history after that point.
Okay, so then let me ask you this question then. So they introduced it as a card game in Japan. Was it meant to be collected, or was it meant to be an actual game where you battle each other?
So the Top Sun cards, which were the original cards, those were meant to be, collectible. And then whenever they introduced the actual trading card game afterwards, that was meant to actually play.
And I imagine that those are sort of like those early cards are like the holy grails, because I keep hearing about the 1999, and we'll jump into that. But just to kind of cover my bases, that those original Japanese cards must be like in high demand.
Yeah. So the Top Sun cards, obviously the one with Charizard on it, the one that has the blue back and no number, that's one of the highest sought after cards in Pokemon. And then the Japanese basic Charizard, the one with the no rarity symbol on the bottom right corner, that's one of the other ones that everybody's after.
And would you say that those are more valuable than the 99 Charizard foils?
I don't think so. I think the English cards will always have more value. That's just kind of how the collector base is, and not just for cards, for every other collectible out there. The English versions will always go for a little bit more than the international.
Okay, and I just have like all these questions. I keep
Yeah.
popping up. It's interesting, but is it something where it's like it almost doesn't make sense because maybe you tell me like where maybe the Japanese cards are more rare, but for some reason, like you said, there's just like this preference, or is it really because of the rarity where a Charizard foil 9910, PSA 10 is really more rare than any Japanese card?
It's a little bit of both. Every collector is different. I personally love the Japanese stuff just because it did come first. But then I've spoken to other collectors, and it's one of those things where they just want to be able to read what's on the card. So I mean,
Gotcha.
it's a base by a case by case basis, pretty much.
Yeah, yeah. All right. So you started collecting the cards, and just going back to your personal journey. So, like, did you start as a collector because you liked the way the cards looked, and you started kind of curating them, building a set, or was it that you were into the card game because you were playing the game?
I started off as a collector. Again, I usually play the video game quite often, but the card game to me was just more about the not nostalgia and you know trying to catch them all, kind of like the franchise's motto, and that's pretty much how it went. Unfortunately, I was one of those kids that had my cards all over the floor, and then mom came in, threw all of them away. But I mean, that's besides the point.
So then you built up like this passion. You got really you love Pokemon, and quick story like on my end when the Pokemon movie came out in the United States. Do you know what year that was? The first
99, I believe so.
99. So 99, and I was like a junior in high school or maybe a sophomore, and all my friends are gonna go watch the Pokemon movie, and I was like, "What are you guys doing? This is a little kid thing." And I was like a holdout, and I had no idea. I kind of underestimated, because I wasn't into Pokemon, but I underestimated just how popular it had become. It was almost like a phenomenon, and I remember that back in
Yeah,
'99. And I'm wondering if you could talk, kind of like what that was like going through that.
I mean, it was awesome, but I remember going to the movie theater as a kid. At the time I was maybe 5 or 6 years old, and
Okay.
just the excitement. I mean, that movie was emotional as a young kid. Towards the end when Bash almost gets killed or something like that. I can't really remember. It was just like really emotional, but it was fun to watch it on the big screen because finally, it was kind of one of those things where we were able to see how popular it actually was, and
Yeah.
they finally showed Mewtwo on the big screen, which was amazing. The movie kind of had it all for me as a collector and a fan.
That's awesome, man. That's awesome to
Yep.
hear. I can appreciate that so much more now than when I was like a dumb teenager. So it turns out. So I was reading a little bit of your biography at Heritage.
Mhm.
You kind of started out in the comic books department,
Yep.
and then at a certain point they moved you back to Pokemon in 2011, if I got that right, because you had that knowledge. And I imagine that they put you back at Pokemon because Heritage saw something, right? At that point, it had been 12 years since the release of the movie. I imagine that at some point there was some sort of the interest in Pokemon kind of went down, but it must have come back up, within that time. What happened around that time, 2011, when you kind of were in charge of that?
Yeah. So, like you mentioned, I started here at Heritage in 2011. I was a 19-year-old kid going to college, and I kind of needed a part-time job. So I came on board. I applied for a summer internship, and they were very kind enough to give me the opportunity to go to school and work here at the same time.
Wow.
That's great. I get to read comics all day and mess around with them. That's pretty cool, and still get a chance to go to school.
Yeah.
So I started working in the comic book department, and then I started doing a little bit of that. Then Comic Art got introduced to me. I love Comic Art now as well. And then we started the animation art department. All my favorite cartoons growing up as a kid and movies and all that stuff too. And I actually started doing Pokemon in around 2016. We sold a Pikachu Illustrator PSA 9 back then for 54,000, and that's whenever we started getting emails and phone calls about Pokemon. Um, and me as the only kid around, I work with a lot of much older people than myself. I was kind of the only one that knew what a Pokemon was, and I was like, but I would do it, and I was
Yeah.
really excited about it. I went home and I remember, just doing all the research as much as I could to try to, get it all back in my mind. And it's been a wild ride. It's been fun. We started off with a small section in the comic book category every 4 months, and within the last couple of years, we've grown. Now I have my own staff. We have our own category, our own catalogs. Yeah, it's been very fun.
So can you go back to that card? It was the Pikachu Illustrator. So we're talking about sort of like these grails in the Pokemon
Yeah.
collection. Um, was there some sort of like not underground, but like 2016, 2015, and I'm just talking from maybe a sports card. The hobby was still that it was a hobby, right? The serious money was only really being spent on the top stuff, and you could get some stuff relatively cheap still. That right now is worth, some stuff is worth six figures that maybe a couple, say 5, 6 years ago, you could get for a couple $1,000. Where did that come from? Like, I'm wondering, was there always, has these Pokemon collectors always been there? These serious investors and collectors always sort of been there?
I think so. I personally just felt, it was just a matter of time. Me personally, I grew up with Pokemon, and now, that I'm in my early 30s. It's one of those things where I have a good paying job now. I'm out of college. I have a little bit of accessible money that I can go back and buy stuff that I grew up with and bring back that kid in me. And I think that's what really happened. Because the Pokemon really started going up in price, like uh, to crazy levels in 2020.
Okay, 2020, right.
Yeah.
So what makes that Illustrator so valuable? If we can talk specifically about that card.
Yeah, so the Pikachu Illustrator, that's what everybody in the community considers as the holy grail in the trading card game. There was only 39 copies distributed. It was part of an illustration contest in 1997 where kids could, draw their favorite Pokemon and submit it to the art contest. And these cards were given out to the winners. In 2016, we sold a copy for 54,000. Last week, I just sold one for 840,000. So that just kind
Wow,
of explains, how much Pokemon has come in the last couple of years or a few years. I mean,
840,000. Was that a graded copy?
yes, PSA 9.
PSA9. Wow, 840,000. And I guess as you said, like we talked a little about the nostalgia. You talked a little bit about like sort of now that generation, right, is growing up, has like some expendable income. And I guess my question is like, what continues to drive that? You know, are Pokemon still, is Pokemon still building that fan base? Are there still 5, 6 year olds like you were, that are entering the Pokemon game? How strong is that brand still?
Oh, it hasn't changed.
Yeah.
I think it's only gotten popular. I have cousins who are 5 or 6 years old, nephews that collect Pokemon cards. It's kind of cool because they think that I have the best job in the world now. So it's pretty fun to be the cool cousin or cool uncle. But yeah, no, I mean Pokemon is still strong. It might be stronger than ever now, especially last year was their 25th anniversary, and they definitely pulled out all the stops in order to make it into a big celebration year. With exclusives, theme songs, just a lot of different things that kind of brought back that nostalgia factor. And now people my age can have something to relate with their kids now. It's
Yeah.
dear to heart to my generation, and the new generation is also very involved because yeah, the cartoon is still being made. They're still coming out with video games. I think Pokemon just announced that they printed out like 13 billion cards in the last 12 months, which is crazy.
Yeah. Yeah. That's kind of so to touch on some of the things I didn't realize. the staying power of Pokemon until that 25th anniversary, and McDonald's was giving away Pokemon cards with every Happy Meal. So I'm like, oh, okay, you get some Pokemon cards, great. And then I open it and it's like, oh, Pikachu and these other characters, and I'm just like, I wonder what they're going for. And so it must have been that first week, and they're selling for like $100 for like these McDonald's Pokemon, and I'm like, no way. And so I go back to McDonald's maybe about a week later. I'm like, hey, you guys still giving away the Pokemon? Yeah, like, we're out. I'm like, what do you mean you're out? Like, there's people that have come in and bought cases from us. I'm like, they could do that? Like, yeah, they just. And so that was like an eye opener for me. I don't know if you could talk a little bit about that McDonald's thing. It was crazy.
Same here. I heard about it. I thought it was super cool. I went to go buy a couple for myself. I'm like, oh, this is really great. And again, I went back a couple of days later. Same thing, sold out. I'm like, okay, let me try another one by work. Sold out. I'm like, okay, cool. But like even at stores, like Walmart and Target and things like that, you can't find Pokemon cards. At some point, they stopped selling them, and then now they have like a one item per person limit, just because Pokemon has printed the heck out of the last few sets in order to try to keep up with demand. But even then, they're still hard. They're still super hard to find.
Yeah, I was at a local Walgreens, and they don't even keep them on the store shelves, right? So there's a note that says, if you want to purchase, go to the front desk, because they're limiting it to two per person.
Yeah.
So now, if you want to get they've almost made them as difficult to get. Well, they have made them as difficult to get as cigarettes. So you have to ask for it. You have to ask for it. So and then that kind of leading into what you're saying, like you said, Pokemon is printing billions of these cards out. And my question to you then would be, as sort of as an expert, the baseball card has gone through its junk wax era, right, where they were printing out these cards like crazy. That Ken Griffey Jr. card that was supposedly very valuable. There might be millions of these copies out there. Is there a danger for Pokemon in kind of printing out so many cards, or is it just a matter of demand?
I think it's a little bit of both. So like with the newer sets, the ones that they're obviously overprinting, I think it's more of just the demand is still out there for them. Again, like we're speaking right now, you can't keep these cards in stock at stores. But I think been the long term scheme of things, definitely the vintage stuff will go up in price, while the more modern stuff will kind of level out and kind of stay there. But my point of view is, as long as people want them, keep on printing them. Yeah.
Pokemon's, they're that's their business, right? And you're absolutely right. I guess I'm wondering, as a collector, right, as somebody that is been in Pokemon, or even someone that wants to enter and kind of understand Pokemon, I'm wondering if you really if you want to start off with putting down a lot of money on the current cards, because chances are that in a couple of years, like you said, or maybe even a year from now, that market might kind of just come down.
Yeah, no, I mean, my advice to people, if somebody's trying to get into Pokemon cards, more of a, because there's two differences. There's the collector standpoint and then the investor point of view. The collector base, buy what you like. The investor part of it is more, I kind of feel that the stuff that was printed out, in the mid 2000s, that's going to go up in price, just because that's kind of where the one period in time where the Pokemon trading card game was on a downward trend. And there were very limited printings, there was an abundance of them at the store, because really, it was that one weird gap between our generation and the next one, that we were all teenagers and we weren't really into it anymore.
Right.
And that stuff, graded been a PSA 10 or a CGC 10 or Beckett 10, that can go, for considerable money now. But I think in the long term, that's what's going to keep on going up in price.
What sets would those be, by the way, for someone that's listening and is kind of interested in looking at that?
It's called the EX series. They did about 16 or 17 sets. Part of that. The real more expensive ones that are highly sought after are the ultra rare cards, and those have a distinctive, like a silver foil border around the front. Those in PSA 10 would probably be, what I would advise for people to get into, if that's what they're planning on doing.
Yeah, and I guess you made a great point about the difference between an investor or collector, and maybe you could definitely be both, right? You could be an investor collector. Yeah. And my question, I guess, is this: like, if you're really going to get into Pokemon, right? Like, should you understand the game? Should you understand the show? Or is it something that you could jump into the cards without really having that background of what Pokemon stands for? Because and I want to add one last thing. Like, you talked about like how you as a child, it was so emotional to watch that movie, right? Like, like you have like you feel it, right? Like you have that deep understanding of the brand. Can someone just jump in without really truly understanding that?
I'm torn about that question. I want to say, no, but in reality, yeah. Anything with Charizard on it is going to go up in price, no matter what. No matter what bear it's from, no matter from what set it's from, no matter the grade, that's going to go up. And it's more about just finding out, which Pokemon are popular. So you can easily go online, and figure that out fairly quickly for somebody that has no idea what a Pokemon is, and definitely just get into the market fairly quickly.
Yeah, you can get into market, and then you just have to do your research on cards and things like that.
Exactly.
Yeah. I imagine though that I don't know, man. Like, having that understanding from the beginning puts you in an advantage, just because you're in the culture, you're in the community, and that helps out a lot.
Totally agree with you on that one.
Yeah. All right. So kind of shifted, and I found something really interesting in your biography, and you mentioned it, the Rad Dad Collection. And this is something that you mentioned was one of your highlights of your career, right?
Yeah.
And I'm wondering, without me kind of saying too much, like, what is the Rad Dad Collection? What was your involvement, and why is it so special to you?
The Rad Dad Collection came from this, it's a beautiful family. I got to meet, the mom and the children at their home. So the Rad Dad Collection is pretty much, a collection that their father used to collect. He was the big Pokemon guy in the family. The kids were interested, but when it came down to, a Pokemon fan, it was their dad. And, sadly, he did pass away at a very young age. And he left, his entire, Pokemon collection to his kids. It included, booster boxes, thousands of cards, toys, memorabilia, anything that you can think of, he had. And whenever, I got the phone call, it was from one of their, it was from the youngest son, Matt. And, he and I started speaking, and it turned out that the collection was more important because it came from their dad, who they all call the Rad Dad.
The Rad Dad.
Yeah. So that's kind of the moniker of the name, and so we started talking about the collection and all that, and they wanted my opinion on value, and I was like, well, it's very massive. I would definitely have to go out and see it in person. They were very kind. They welcomed me into their home. I remember the mom, she made cookies and had waters for us and all that stuff, and it was just very homecoming. And I sat down with them and we started discussing it. And that's where I really got to know them and just how close the family was. And just the dad, their dad wasn't there anymore, but they had this collection that they could share with everyone else. It was more about them sharing the love that their dad had for Pokemon with the community, and opening up, that chapter in their life again. And no.
And the collection realized, I saw there $3.2 million. There's a little bit of things to go in there. Like, obviously he must have left some really amazing stuff, some one of a kind stuff, maybe even to achieve that kind of value. But the second thing is like you mentioned, like the emotional attachments, right? Yeah. What the items must have meant to the family. And so I'm wondering, if you could talk a little bit about that, like the value of the collection, what was in it, maybe, but also kind of how did the family, feel about, selling off the collection, if there was some sadness there at all.
Yeah, it was a little hard for them to to part with it. Obviously, but again, they're just really close, and they did give it some time. I think I went to go visit them, and it took about 3 weeks to hear back from them. And I think what happened was they all just sat with each other and discussed. To them again, it wasn't really about the money. The money was great, obviously, because it was just such a massive collection. But to them, it was really just about sharing who their dad was with everyone else and telling their story of how Pokemon changed their life as a kid, but their dad's life, and how it kind of brought them closer together with him.
Yeah.
In terms of what was in the collection, it was large amounts of sealed boxes, both English and Japanese, which were the bulk of the money in the long run. They had a first edition Charizard, a lot of different memorabilia type things, promotional cards, complete sets. They pretty much had it all, basically.
They pretty much had it all.
Yeah.
That's amazing. When was that, by the way? Because I'm curious.
That was 2021.
Oh, 2021. Oh, okay. Wow.
Yeah, I think the first time that I spoke to them was around March 2021.
Got it. Okay. Cool. Yeah, because I was thinking it was earlier, and now I was like, wow, how did he amass such a collection in such a short period of time? But I guess maybe possibly had upwards of 20, 25 years almost of collecting, I imagine.
Yeah, no, he so I can't remember the exact year that he passed away, but it was several years ago, because I think the collection only went up to Neo Destiny. So they just had it in a room this entire time until the youngest saw one of our press releases that we had just sold a Pokemon box for $400,000. Then he was like, "Wait a minute, I think we have one of those." And he ran into the room and he's like, "Yes, we have one of those." So he called his older brother, and his older brother was like, "Wait, what are you doing? What is this?" Blah blah. And then he's like, "No, let me do some research." And then like a couple of days later, I got a phone call from him.
That's crazy, man. That it was just laying there, and they were just like, "Yeah, that's Dad's." That's what Dad left us, a bunch of junk, maybe, and it turns out that's no junk at all. What a story, man. So we've talked a little bit. I mean, we've talked a lot about Pokemon, and obviously that's the big thing. Kind of curious to have your take on what you feel, and we don't have to belabor it at all. But Jake Paul, was it Jake Paul or Logan Paul? I'm confused with the brothers. Logan Paul. So wearing those those necklaces with those it's more valuable than any diamond or whatever. Good or bad for the hobby?
I think it's good, but I think it adds a lot more hype to the entire thing, and just the fact that he spent $5.2 million on one Pokemon card is absolutely nuts to me. But if you have the money and it's something that you really want, go for it.
What was that card, by the way? And is that truly the most valuable Pokemon card out there?
Yes, so the card was a Pikachu Illustrator, like the one that we just saw recently, but his copy is the only PSA 10 copy known to exist.
Okay, so it's and again, like you said, that there's only an edition of 39 even?
39 were distributed, yes.
And this is the one PSA 10. Okay.
That's the only one, yes. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, definitely. That's another holy grail.
Exactly, yes. That's the holiest of holy grails.
So let's kind of turn around a little bit. Well, you are the TCG trading card game expert at Heritage. Before we start recording a little bit, we talked a little bit, and you mentioned that Magic the Gathering is also gaining some steam. I know nothing about Magic the Gathering, but can you talk about that market a little bit? Kind of why it's getting increasing in value, and how that whole community is different from maybe the Pokemon community.
Yeah, so Magic the Gathering was released in 1993, a few years before Pokemon was. It's a totally different group of collectors, of fans, player base. And the important thing about Magic that people, didn't used to know that I think is becoming more prevalent now is just how rare some of the early printing was. Like an alpha card, but a rare card. They only printed 1,100 copies. And then, when they printed out the alpha edition, they were like, okay, let's see how the first printing does. Sold out basically. Okay, great. 2 months later, they released the beta edition. 2 months later, they had sold so much that 2 months later, they released the third printing of it. So
Wow.
those early sets, it's really hard to find, especially in high grade, just because there's not that much of it out there. It wasn't printed, and you always have to take into account, how much of that material was actually, destroyed over time, which sadly does happen. Um, so
Yeah.
1,100 copies minus whatever percentage of it is no longer here, it adds more to the value because it does not come around that often.
So just to get it straight, so like in those earlier sets, you're saying that there were three separate editions made of the same set.
Yes, for
Yeah.
the original set, it was the Alpha edition, the
Hmm.
Beta edition, and then the Unlimited edition. For the rare card standpoint, the Alpha had 1,100 copies printed, the Beta edition had 3,000 copies, and the Unlimited had 16,000 copies. Which 16,000 copies is still not a lot for the demand the game had.
Yeah. And so I imagine that how would you tell the difference between first, second, or third editions? Is there the markings on the card, the way they were designed?
Yeah, so on the Alpha edition, the borders are more rounded because that's kind of when they were still like, let's see if it works out or not. Whenever they released the Beta edition, the borders were more refined, more cornered. And then the Unlimited edition, that one they changed the border to a white border instead of the black traditional border,
Got it.
and that's how you're able to tell which edition it's from.
One thing maybe, and I don't want to take up too much of your time. Like,
No.
what is the counterfeit space look like? Because I went through a little Yu-Gi-Oh phase, and I was buying cards at some point, and I realized that like half the cards I had bought were counterfeit,
Yeah.
and some of them, if you don't really pay careful attention, some of them are really really well done, and some of them were obvious looking back on it, but some of them were really really well done. What is that like? Like for Magic the Gathering, for Pokemon, even how many fakes are in circulation? How easy is it to fake these cards?
There's a lot of them out there.
Yeah,
And it's one of those things where over time it gets easier and easier to fake them,
yeah,
unfortunately. But luckily there are grading services, and me and my staff have background on catching fakes, and some of them do cross by. When we're at a convention or something like that, somebody brings a book or something like that, and we're able to tell pretty quickly. There are some of them where we're like, okay, let me get a second opinion on. But yeah, no, I mean, that's one of those things about counterfeit stuff. The more something is worth, the more counterfeits we're going to find out there.
you're gonna find out that. Has there ever been the case, and this is not a there's not like a criticism of any grading services, but have there been cases where you've seen slabbed counterfeits?
Oh yeah,
That have gotten by.
yeah,
Yeah, yeah, and that's kind of
happens.
one of my worries is like when somebody's maybe starting a decent collection of a not a super expensive card, but like a $100 or a $200 card.
Mhm.
Just because it says PSA or whatever doesn't necessarily mean that that it's legit, because it could fool anybody, right?
Mhm.
So I'm wondering, like, people need to kind of educate themselves. What do these cards look like? How can you tell the difference between a real or a fake? And I'm wondering if you had any sort of tips on that.
Yeah, I mean, definitely do your homework. There's a lot of good websites that kind of pinpoint things that you should be looking for on a certain card. And just try to buy from a reliable source, somebody that or somebody that you kind of know that is big in the community or things like that. And me personally, there's things where I'm like, I think something's off, but I'm not sure, and I'm not afraid of texting somebody or calling somebody and getting a second opinion from. But I
Yeah,
think that's what everybody should do, because I think the more that we catch as a community, the better for the market.
yeah. And so can you give me a little example of that? Like, I mean, how good is it to how good are these counterfeits to where you've been stopped and you're kind of like, you've seen thousands upon thousands of these cards, and even you were kind of like, I can't pinpoint, but there's something wrong here, or I'm not totally sure. Like, what would that be?
Whenever I get to that point where it's something that it looks authentic, but there's something about it that I don't like, whether it's the color or the size of the lettering or something like that. Me, working at Heritage, I usually don't take that stuff. And I've learned to just trust my instincts, and I think that's what people should do. Because, yeah, sometimes it's the smallest little thing that you can think of that is off about the card that will tell you if it's a counterfeit or not.
Yeah.
And there's little tricks, with the black light. There's people that do make fake slabs out there as well.
Yeah.
Those, and that's why the grain services have been doing a better job at making them more tamper proof and banning logos and things like that to their labels to prevent that from happening.
Wow. So sort of going back and kind of putting a cap on that, like the Magic the Gathering, what is the market like now? Is it another kind of emerging market? You did mention, the earlier limit editions, how limited they were. But is it something that's also increasing in popularity?
Oh yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
I mean, like I said, the Pokemon and the Magic market are two different things. There is some crossover, but very minimal. But yeah, no, Magic prices just keep on going in price. Last week we sold a card called the Splendid Genesis, which was a Richard Garfield promo. Richard Garfield was the creator of Magic, and one of the little perks was he got to create his own cards, showcasing an important moment in his life. That card in particular showcased the birth of his first child, and the first time we sold it, which was the first time it is sold at a public auction ever, it sold for $23,000, I believe. So this time around, I was like, oh, it's probably going to sell for around $30,000. It sold for $72,000. I mean, which just kind of shows just how fast the market is growing overall, and just how it's one of those things where people are finally realizing how rare this stuff is.
Yeah,
and that's the biggest key with Magic. It's so much more rare than Pokemon, than Yu-Gi-Oh, than anything else.
Yeah. What was that gap like? What was that timeline between the 23,000, 27,000, and the 472,000? What was that?
A little over a year, like a year and 4 months. Yeah.
A little over a year?
Yes. Yeah.
Wow, man. I mean, this is news to me. Like, this is like, see, I guess when I'm not in the space, I don't understand how powerful that market is, man. I mean, 'cause, unless you're in it, but that's amazing.
Yeah. Yeah, no, but I personally think, that's one of the things that, we as an auction house offer. We are introducing these rare cards that people might not know about. And, we do our work and our research to figure out, what was the printing run. This card in particular, there was only 110 copies printed out, because he only gave them out to friends and family, and that's it.
Wow.
So the only way you could get one of those cards is by being a relative or really close to him. They were never sold. They were never reprinted by a set, and that's what the general population doesn't know. And that's our job to educate people and explain why something is worth this much.
Yeah. Jesus, thank you so much for your time. I kind of wanted to end with your end of things, the heritage auctions. Do you currently have a big auction going on? When's your next big auction going to happen? And what are some things that a collector or an investor can look for in there?
So my next big auction is late September. We just launched our first solo trading card game weekly auctions. Those start on Wednesday nights at 10 p.m. and the live bidding starts the next Wednesday at 8 p.m. Central Time. We're just about to launch our showcase auction called the Legendary Pokemon Showcase Auction. That's going to run for a month. And our big next signature auction is going to be late September. And I did bring a few cards, but I don't know if you want to check them out from that auction. Yep. Okay, so this one in particular is it's a test print Blastoise card. So this is whenever Wizards of the Coast was pitching the idea to Pokemon to license the distribution agreement internationally outside of Japan. And it was such beginning early phases that they didn't have a Pokemon backing, so it actually has a Magic the Gathering backing.
Wow.
There's 4 of these cards graded. This one is the highest graded copy. We are still the only company that has sold these cards so far. which is great for us. The last two copies that were 1 point lower than this went for 216,000. So, this one should have a little bit more of a premium because it's a full point higher.
What's the inferred value on that? Maybe 275K or higher?
I'm thinking 250 to 275. Yeah. Yeah. Here's another one. Speaking of Magic the Gathering, kind of how it all started. Obviously, before they do a trading card game, they have to play test it. This is a Gamma playtest card. This is the third round of cards that they kind of. It's not actually printed. It's more of just a cardboard sheet. This is when they were playtesting the cards to see how the game was going to work and the different mechanics. This one in particular, it's called Time Walk, which is one of the Power 9 cards, which are known to be the most powerful cards in Magic. It was part of the initial release set upon the Alpha edition. So for us to have a playtest card from one of the most powerful cards and most expensive cards out there is a pretty big deal.
So you're basically talking about prototypes. These are things that were not available to the public.
Yes, these were definitely prototypes. This one was just a marketing pitch to Pokemon from Wizards of the Coast, and this one was a prototype used to test how the game's mechanics were going to work. So these are definitely pre-first edition and Alpha edition. And then here I have something from Yu-Gi-Oh. It's from the it's one of the most expensive and sought after trophy cards out there. It's called Cyberstein, and it's a BGS 10, which in the collector community, BGS grades a lot harsher on their 10s than PSA and CGC do. So in order to have one of these been a 10, it's crazy hard to find.
Yeah, so everything's got to be perfect.
Exactly. So and we have a lot of other great cards. These are just a few examples of what we have going on in our next signature auction.
So that'll be in late September.
Late September. Mm-hmm.
Late September. And what's the difference between, say, something like a signature auction and like your weekly auction that you mentioned?
It's more of a price point because there are different levels, of how much people can spend. I can't spend, personally, $100,000 on a card. So our select weekly auctions range from $150 to $3,000 to $5,000. Okay. Our showcase auctions are kind of, they're not the high end and they're not the low end stuff. They're kind of just themed. So the first showcase auction we ever did was Magic the Gathering only. This time around, it's going to be Pokemon. I'm planning on doing a Yu-Gi-Oh themed auction. I'm planning on doing some other, theme related auctions for other trading card games as well. And the signature auction, that's a little bit more exclusive. That's where, we do bump up our minimum values. I think, so currently our minimum lot for the floor session, which is where we have like a live auctioneer taking bids, that's $5,000 or more. And for that, we print out a catalog and things like that.
Awesome, man. Thank you so much, Jesus, for being on the podcast with me.
Thank you.
Really opened my eyes to Pokemon a lot, and thanks for sharing your kind of your work history and also your personal experience with the brand. Without a doubt, it's something that that's as big as it is. Crazy enough, it could probably even get even bigger. So
absolutely, yeah, definitely,
yeah. But again, thanks for your time, and hopefully we can catch up, maybe a few months from now and talk some more about Pokemon, seeing the latest developments, and even go into some more Yu-Gi-Oh! Or Magic.
Sounds great. Let's do it.
Jesus, have a great day.
All right, thank you. You too.
Take care. There's so much good stuff in here from Jesus, from how he knows so much about Pokemon, to sharing some of the highlights from his career at Heritage. I also really enjoyed his thoughts on the current state of the hobby and how he sees a potential entry point with Pokemon cards made in the mid-2000s. I hope you learned something new today, so a big thanks to Jesus for coming on the podcast to talk Pokemon, and also for showing off some of the cards that will be at auction in September. And a big thanks to you for listening. If you enjoyed today's episode, let others know about it or leave a review or a comment. Until the next time, take care.